Yeah. Well, everybody's quiet, so I guess we'll start. It's also new to you and to me. I wasn't here last week when we first switched Bible class and worship around, and this is a temporary thing for the moment, so by the time you get used to it, we'll change it back or something. That's the way it goes. Just think of what it's like to go live in a foreign place 7 hours ahead, and then come here. It's time change even more. But I'm glad to be back. And visitors, we're glad you're with us. This is our second time to have our Bible class after our worship. So we're breaking history and tradition and probably be stoned here for doing so. But it's just an attempt to see what's good for the church as a whole. And in a few more weeks, then we'll look for input from everybody, and everybody can share what they think, so we can all be equally involved in giving our input and wondering why it didn't come out the way we hoped. Who knows? Yeah, I'm just joking for part of that. We'll just see how it goes. We can adjust any which way. Fact is that we get to worship and to do it without masks for most of you. I know some of you are still wearing it, and that's fine. Melanie and I did go to Israel the first week we were gone. The second week we spent time in Athens, Greece, and we got to be in a lot of places where the Apostle Paul was. And these were things that she and I had been anxious to do for some time, and it looked like at the last minute we weren't going to get to go. So we never really told many people that were even thinking about it because it was so unsure. And we were to leave on Saturday, and the Wednesday before we got the tour guide says, it's all clear, we get to go to Israel. The government's finally given us our stamp of approval. So that's why we never said anything, because when you asked where you're going, we'd have to be changing it back and forth so often. And so, in Greece and in Israel, they're far more careful about this COVID thing. When the hotel we stayed at in Greece, if you came down to eat, when you passed through the lobby, you had to wear your mask. And if you were sitting around and eating from the little buffet of a sort, breakfast, you had to have plastic gloves on when you went to the thing. Each time you'd put your gloves back on for whatever you'd take. And if not, they would very kindly and friendly say, please put your gloves back on. So, because you forget, we haven't done that too much. So we're all in the midst of change, and it's kind of nice to be home and to be back with my people. So last week, in the last several weeks, we had been talking about decisions. And the fact is, just a real quick summary, every little decision that you make really forms, eventually, the character, the personality that you have. And I didn't, before reading that book and going through the class material, ever feel that in debt or whatever to what was going on in the small decisions I make. But accumulation of all those things means you're here today or not for others, and makes a difference in where you stand and what you give into and so many other things. And so that's putting that aside and closing the door. That was decisions. Now I want to shift gears, and I want to talk about a book I'm utilizing called Sinai Summit. It's about the Ten Commandments, but it's I think a very good view of how that is such a relevant topic to discuss, because it deals with our character crisis. And when you hear that word, you think, okay, that applies. Any Christian, any person with any somewhat beliefs or whatever in God, I think realizes when they walk around in our own country that we have a moral issue, moral problems, and a real character crisis going on in our neighborhoods and in our schools and in our government and everywhere else. And occasionally we get to participate in making decisions how we'd like things to change, and oftentimes voting or whatever, it doesn't turn out the way we want as a Christian. Is that not right? Okay. And so, not to be despondent about that, but just a realization that the walls are getting bigger, the crisis is getting stronger as our beliefs and our moral thinking is diminished. That is going to impact us, and has been. Craig, our campus minister who led the singing for those visiting, Craig talks oftentimes about the difference between the students that are coming out to the Student Center today and their thinking, and the ones that were, 12 years ago when Craig first started here, I think, or so. The discussion and the questions are so different. And you would never have people, when you talked about dating and how to choose a mate, one of the primary is choose one of the right sex. And you go, well, wait a minute. Why is that even a question? And you see where we're at when kids are realizing that some people think that's an option. And that's our friends, and a lot of them are dealing with that. And they grow up with all of that influence. I think I was told recently that our passports are now changing. When you apply for it, or whatever it's marked down, male, female, or other. And so whatever, just be whatever you want to be. You change it anytime you want. And all that has to do is just has to say is that we're changing. And I feel like we're being overcrowded in our country, and that the topic of character crisis is something to discuss not only in this class as adults, but with children or grandchildren, whatever age you got, at their level, of course, and to realize that we've got to do all that we can to not only make sure their hearts are instructed in the right way, but also for ourselves, to keep reminding ourselves that this is still what it says in the Scriptures. And those things haven't changed. And yet, that's sometimes what's called into question. So, Exodus chapter 20 is a lengthy section here of the Ten Commandments. And so I want to read through it. My voice is somewhat back, kind of out of touch, and so getting up and preaching for, was it 30 minutes or more like an hour? I don't remember. But anyway, whatever time, 2 hours Tom says. I thought it was longer, it felt like to me. Somebody should have waved a flag, but anyway. My throat's hanging in here. I'm working on it. Verse 1, Exodus 20. As God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You see what he's doing here? There's some Godfather movie, I think it is. There's a little clip. I haven't seen the Godfather movies, but I just see these little clips. And the guy goes, you talking to me? Like, do you dare even say it like that to me? And here's God laying out who he is. I am the God who brought you out. Like the mother says, I brought you in this world and I can take you out. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. And I walk those lands throughout all of Israel. It's amazing that the Old Testament all happened right there where the New Testament. Never knew that. I'm not an archaeology buff of a sort, but I am far more than I've ever been to realize that it's all right there. In all those places where God's temples were destroyed, and other gods came along, these other countries, and built other gods on top of it. And this was a battle in that day and time of my God's bigger than your God. And it's still that same thing. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that's on the earth beneath, or is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting with the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That's just in a meaningless way. It's not just saying just with cursing, okay? Be mindful. Reverence his name. For the Lord your God will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in an empty manner. Vain. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but on the seventh day it is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor a stranger who's within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that's in them, and rested them on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land in which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor shall you covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And you talk to people today, and they see that, and they shake their heads. And what do they think? Now this is discussion time. So I'm not taking that if a woman speaks up, she's doing nothing more than adding a comment or discussing. We're maintaining our thought about what is proper in the auditorium. But men or women, whoever, just speak up. This is a class. What do people think today about this? Okay, happened a long time ago, so it doesn't apply today. It's not relevant today. What else? We've evolved. There you go. We're better than that now.
We should be superstitious. What Tom just said, that is the thinking of many.
Don't be superstitious.
We live in superstition to believe in deity.
Okay. Just overall in believing God, that's kind of archaic, superstitious. Bob?
What about the Ten Commandments don't apply today because that was go on?
Just so long ago. Doesn't
The old law.
the old law? Okay, the old law doesn't apply today. I see.
It's amazing that these people, this is the first time I ever really noticed that God spoke the Ten Commandments before they were written on the tablets.
Right.
So the people heard and trembled. And then the passage after says, please don't have God speak anymore to us or we're going to die.
Scared them.
And despite that, hearing that, seeing the mountain on fire with smoke, Moses goes up for a month or two, or however long he's
40 days, right?
and then they throw all that out the window and say, yeah, that crazy thing that happened where the mountain was on fire, where that God doesn't exist anymore, we're going to have a golden calf. And we wonder why the people in our day and age, where we're reading the Ten Commandments, we're reading the words of God, and we didn't actually physically see it. We have to see it in our mind's eye. And we have a hard time grasping it, but the people who were there had a hard time grasping it.
Firsthand.
Firsthand.
Right.
You know,
And
it's just interesting that the struggle was even there with the bystanders.
true. I mean, it was a struggle to accept, a struggle to keep, temptations to go different directions. And within 40 days' time, as you point out, it's already past due for some people, not considering the fact that we're looking at thousands of years later. And so all of these things here just exemplify the battle that goes on in people's minds, especially when it's a law you don't want to keep. So you're going to look for every opportunity, excuse, or whatever there is to justify why you really don't think a particular law or a particular thing is as important. And be it an Old Testament, we can even go back further, because it goes, not only goes back further, but for those who might be mindful of the fact that there is a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it gives them even more ground to say, well, that's not relevant. In some of the things that I learned in the last couple of weeks, my ignorance of geography, Bible geography, and archaeology is just incredible for the number of years I've been preaching. And every time I would read, they were here or there, and they named these places. I go, yeah, pronounce it as best you can and go on, not realizing where all these little places were and what was happening. And so as I look at this, I think of what these people were doing in that day and time, all the way across the board. It's all in that same area where they were observing either what God said or trying to do something different because they had different beliefs in different gods. And there was a constant battle going back and forth between nations over whose gods were bigger. And so in this whole thing, they don't want to look at the Ten Commandments as being anything great. Now, here's where I'm headed toward. Is one of the things that I learned on this little journey was that Constantine, who was the emperor of Rome, started in 325 AD. And I remember this historically, that he became a Christian. That prior to that time, from like AD 80 and 90, especially into the 100s and 200s, all these pagan emperors over Rome were persecuting Christians. Now there's this huge change historically, and the guy that's in charge of the whole Roman Empire, and that stretches a long way, is now Christian. And not only is he Christian, but you do well to be Christian with him. So if you want to be a good citizen, if you want to have healthy whatever, and you don't want to be on the bad side of the powerful Roman government, do like the governor or the emperor does. And so all of this area is converting to Christianity, good and bad. I mean, the good is that the persecution stopped. Bad is that everybody wants to be a Christian now, regardless of how much they really believe inside, because it's the thing to do. So you see how that could be disadvantageous for Christianity as a whole. Lacks sincerity. It's kind of a half-hearted thing, and on and on. But Emperor Constantine, in an effort to try to strengthen the Christian belief, sent his mother out to certain areas to check on some of these locations where rumors had gone around that these were sacred grounds. And two of them where Jesus was entombed, and it's either the crucifixion or his birthplace. And so they're going back, this is in AD 327 about, to talk to people who say, this is where he was put into the tomb. And to say, and this is where he was born. So they went around and talked to a lot of people. Now, that goes back a ways. It doesn't go all the way back to the beginning, but I'll get there in a second. Let me explain what's going on. But they're talking to people whose great-great-grandfather said, this is the place. And so, and everybody is saying exactly the same thing. So you're getting a consensus that everybody says, this is where he was laid in the tomb. This spot right here. So you kind of start believing it. Very possibly. But here's the point I'm headed toward. There's still a doubt because it's oral tradition that's been passed down. So maybe they're making it up. Maybe somebody's great whoever, a very faithful Christian, whoever, told everybody that, and that's where the rumor started. What I'm getting to is it's not written exactly that way until Constantine's mother came in and they started documenting every bit of the details, where she went, who she talked to, and all this list, it's all written. So our written stuff takes us back to 327. Now here's where I'm headed. This is written. What we just read is not an oral tradition. It was spoken, as Alex mentioned, by God, and Moses took meticulous notes, both times. Carved in stone, as some people say, well, that's not etched in stone. Well, this one is. Now, why does God do that instead of the oral tradition? Why didn't he just have them pass it around and just keep sharing it with your families, tell them good stories at night? Why is it always written in either a manuscript form or, in this case, carved in stone? Why do we have these battles over the Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, in Israel? And the fact is that these date back to 200 years before Christ, or 100 years before Christ on some of them. Why is this such an issue as opposed to oral tradition?
Legitimate documentation.
Documentation. What about documentation?
It's not changed. Heard through the grapevine can change.
That's right. The thing is that it is written exactly the way it was written. And anything that's passed on orally always has a little bit of a slant to it. An emphasis who later can twist and change or whatever. Words change meaning, et cetera, along the way. And so all of this keeps changing. And whether you played the little gossip game is that when we were kids, one person starts a phrase and they pass it to the next, and you see what it comes out after passing it through 10 kids, and it's nothing like what the first person whispered in the ear to the second person, the third person, if you know what I'm after. I mean, those things change.
There's a natural tendency on the human part to embellish things and to make it first person if you can, and to broaden it and make it flowery, and so it does get tainted over time.
It does. And for those in it, it is just natural for us to make it bigger than it used to be. Dramatic. Knutson.
I think God knew that what he was writing would be contentious. He tells us he can't divide this, so they keep finding more and more fragments. Well, these are within 500 years of when it was written, within 200, within 100, because he knows people are going to question it. And yet, I read at one point, the Iliad, the Odyssey by Homer, nobody questions that's what Homer wrote, and yet all we have is like one
Document.
thousand years after Homer supposedly wrote this story, and so it's been passed down that, oh yeah, that's what Homer wrote. Well, nobody questions that.
Right.
We question this, and we have hundreds of thousands of fragments within 100 years when it was originally written.
Good point. The multiplicity of the documents that all say the same thing just further verify. But the point is that it's written and it's not oral. And so when we're looking at what God is up to, he's doing this on purpose because he knows how we are. We embellish, we change, we do anything. We do what the Pharisee, the priest, whoever, that went to Jesus and wanted to know what the greatest command was. And then after he got through telling Jesus says, will you tell me? And he told him, he said, go and do likewise. And he says, but who is my neighbor? But there's a little phrase that Luke puts in there that he gives you an indication of the man's heart when he asks that question. He says, and seeking to justify himself, he asked the question. And that's where we're at. We always want to probe in areas wherever we can find loopholes to justify what we want to do and how we want to change it. And it's hard to do when when there's 1,000 different manuscripts that all say the same thing. And it's there. It's not just one document that's been passed on that was written only 500 years ago. These are going back before the time of Christ. Prophecies about Christ himself, by the way, from Isaiah and Psalms, those are part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what an incredible find. And all of that is telling us that God knew we needed it written down, or we'd start changing it right and left.
Even with it written down, 2 Timothy 4, for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears, and they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths.
Right.
Which that was happening as he was on Mount Sinai. I mean, the Egyptians worship gods. Let's have our own God.
Right.
I mean, this happened all throughout the Bible.
And the stories are written there for us to see how humans are. So we're not any different. And God just puts it out there and says, this is what's happening. And so they had a character crisis just like we did. And their leaders, the best of them, like we mentioned in the lesson, Moses even flawed it in trusting God all the way through. For those that have worked with people in any setting, church setting, business setting, when you're in charge of a group of people, and I know lots of you all done this, you know, and after you get through with a handful of them, you go, I didn't ask for these questions, you know, and I think back to Moses, when finally he got so frustrated at all the complaining, he looked up at God and he said, I didn't give birth to these people. Why do I have to do this? I mean, give me a new stack of people here. And it's difficult because people are people.
There's a book called The Books and the Parchments. It's really interesting. It uses backdating to determine what's called the canon test of authenticity of the scriptures that we have. And fortunately, it's based on what has been written, not on what has been said, but the documents that are there. What we have today, certainly the Old Testament, it has passed the test for the Jews, even though there are 14 books that are included in some of the Old Testament. They don't really pass the test of authenticity that the Jews have established. So
Right.
39 books that we have in the Old Testament are accurate, and our 27 books have proven to be the same way through a canon test of authenticity.
Everybody get that? We're talking about now just why we have what we have in the Bible and not something else, or taking out some. But it's been tested and tried from so many different angles by people that are Christians and are not Christians, as far as authorities are concerned, that these are the documents that have always been viewed from God's people, from his inspired people, apostles, etc., that these are the ones that are Scripture, like reference that Peter makes when he talks about Paul, and he talks about how some people twist the Scriptures as they do some of Paul's writings. So he was even giving attestation to the fact that Paul's writings are Scripture, as he makes that reference in 1 Peter. So here what we're doing here is now we're trying to settle, or introduce, maybe a better way to say, this whole issue of why it's so important to talk about this, and the fact is how we need to strengthen our heart in that direction. So how do we get here, as far as the United States is concerned, or the world for that matter? Why is it that we are dealing with this if in fact we have all these archaeologists and scientists that have gone through and they can prove this, and it's written in black and white, it's clearly there? Why is it that we don't have some better agreement on what it says?
People want to do what they want to do.
Okay. Y'all hear that? People will want to do what they want to do.
So then
and they've got to justify it, so they're going to somehow reinterpret it, whatever. And
Again, we've evolved from that.
yeah, we've evolved. It's not like we haven't done that before. And it's the whole thing. And as was pointed out by some or several people here, that God knew this to start with. And that's why he put it in black and white. I mean, he knew what kind of people he was dealing with. And he said, get it as clear as you can, and at least, they've got a specific groundwork, a common place to go to. Because they'll change it no matter what, if that's the case.
Or they say that it's not that, the interpretation was not correct.
Right. Okay, so interpretation can be part of the loophole experience that we come up with. Let's look at a few passages here. Let's start with Proverbs 14, verse 12. Let's see here. Bob, you there? Doke?
I'm here.
Okay, not only here and awake, but or at that point, I can't see you. I see you turning pages.
I'm there.
Okay,
You said Proverbs 14, beginning in verse 12?
verse 12.
Yeah, reading from New King James. There is a way that seems right to a man, but his end is the way of death. Even in laughter, the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief.
Okay, let's focus on verse 12. It does fit within what's happening here, both those together. There's a way that seems right, but its end is death. What's God saying here about humankind? Darlene.
Sometimes things will seem right because the devil has come your way and he's tricking you to think something is okay when it's not.
Okay.
So the brain can say, oh, this is okay, because he's so wise in the way he comes at us. And so we'll go, oh, that seems okay. But
Oh, you mean like in the Garden of Eden? When
Well, yeah.
Eve looked at the plant,
kind of.
it looked like it was okay, seemed okay, and its end was
It wasn't.
exactly what God said, death. Huh.
He still does it.
Still does it. What do the police call that? Modus operandi?
So then you look at, when you think about rock music, you've got the highway to hell and just stairway to heaven.
Yeah. Yeah.
One is broad and one is narrow, so.
I'd say both of those sound like the Broadway, but anyway. It tells a little bit about your era that you've listened to music. And mine too, because I recognize both of them. Starts playing in my mind immediately. Okay, but that's who we are. But here, the thing I wanted you to notice is that it seems right. It's at a glance is kind of the point that God's telling you. You're not really making a concentrated effort to determine, is it really good or is it bad? Is it right or wrong? And that's what we're talking about as far as moral decisions. There is a right and there is a wrong. And boy, that rubs a lot of people raw. You can't always be sure about that. How do you know? Just know, But in this whole thing, it seems right.
David, piggybacking on that idea, one thing that I've become troubled with over the past few years is everyone loves to get on TV and say they are true. Well, I've always been taught there's the truth and everything else. Everyone wants their opinion. They want their opinion to be valued, and they want what they want. I think that plays into this verse.
It does. Part of it is just what you want it to be. But even an innocent, semi-studious person looks at something, and I use the word semi-studious because that's kind of what I get out of this is, it seems to be right. Well, that's good. Let's go. don't make a concentrated effort over spending a lot of time worrying about it. It seems to be right. In the book of Colossians, Paul writes, I think it's in chapter 2, where he mentions people who use, and the term is in Greek, a plausible sounding argument for their defense. It's like, sounds good. That makes sense. But they don't spend a lot of time examining how accurate it might be. And as Darlene pointed out, and Satan is so good at making it look good. And so it seems right. It looks good. Fruit looks good, as Eve said. Good for the eyes. Might help my health. Maybe I'll get a little more energy. Any other thing we can come up with. And all of a sudden, we've made a good, solid case for doing whatever, but it's not with a whole lot of effort. And so that whole idea of what seems to be right, and it's catastrophic, the decision. But the end's death. Well, never think about that. And so all these little insignificant decisions all of a sudden can be so consequential. Barbara.
I think of Thou art the man, where people have had to have a story or parable told to them before they realize they are the
Nicole.
right. And it seems so simple that they should have realized that without someone coming to them and telling them a story to make them understand that.
And who are you talking about now?
Well, you know what I'm thinking.
I know you're thinking about David in the Old Testament. Barbara and I pick on each other once in a while. It's only because of my first sermon I ever preached here 7 years ago. Barbara says I picked on her.
And you did.
And she hadn't forgotten it.
But I mean, you see what I'm
But I
saying.
do. It's the thing that we don't realize where we've gone in making our decisions. And by the way, she's referring back to the case in the Old Testament where David committing fornication with Bathsheba, adultery, and then kills Uriah the Hittite, and thinks he's still a man after God's own heart in the whole process until, who was the prophet that was sent to David? Nathan. And he goes to him and he tells him a parable about some story over here, and David's ready just to crucify the person only to find out it's him. You are the man. As someone said, he pointed that bony finger at him. I don't know what kind of finger he had. It might have been but it worked. Got his point. And David condemned himself and then realized he was talking about himself. Okay.
Another thing, the Old Testament is as a schoolmaster.
True.
And so that is one way that would help you to make things come together right.
Well, that's true. It does distinguish between laws and what's useful in learning. Romans 4:15, I think, is his verse 4. It's, those things that are written before time are written for our learning. So it's not wasted information, but it's not a law anymore. And the word schoolmaster that Galatians uses is really like a tutor that picks you up and instructs you along the way to take you to Christ. You don't get the full message, but you get some lessons along the way that, as the Old Testament points us toward Christ. Judges 17, verse 6. Judges 17, verse 6. Avon, you there? I see you pointing your finger like you got it there.
In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Sounds good. Doing what's right. You're evaluating it. What's wrong with it, though? His own sight. Joe, you and I swap glasses. You'd be able to see as well as you do if you wear my glasses? No way. We all have different viewpoints, glasses or whatever, that we look at things, and they either help or they can hinder. The problem is that we have different colors in our glasses. I'm using the kind of metaphorically here. and allows us to see things in a certain way. Rush.
That verse reminds me of, many of you may know that the restaurant, Hard Rock Cafe. And when I was growing up, we lived abroad, and so there were a lot of Hard Rock Cafes. I can remember a little saying or tagline underneath the logo, God is my co-pilot. I remember looking at my father saying, hey, Dad, that sounds pretty good. You know, this is, you know.
Sounds good.
Right. And he looked at me and said, well, God needs to be your pilot. And that's what that verse sounds like.
Yeah. It was a catchy bumper sticker.
Yeah.
God is my co-pilot.
Sounds great.
You see him everywhere until they realize that's not quite good enough.
Right.
We'll rely on him when we can't control it. Otherwise, we want to be in charge, which is really the way we are. So we're going to do what's right in our own eyes. We'll make our own decisions. We're going to try to decide what's right and what's wrong. But the problem is, well, let's look at the next one here. Jeremiah 10:3. And it tells us what the problem is. Dean, are you there?
See Jeremiah 10:23?
Yes.
I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who talks to direct his steps.
Talks or walks?
Excuse me.
Walks, okay. Well, different translations. Okay. So he says, I know. Jeremiah writes, he's inspired. It's not in man to know the way. It's not in man who walks to direct his steps. I saw a video snippet this morning of my 1-year-plus grandson walking. He's grown from crawling to walking. And he goes everywhere where he shouldn't be. And you understand that. Just because he knows how to walk doesn't mean he knows where he should be walking. So it's a vigilant thing to keep him out of trouble. And he got so mad at his big brother the other day when Mama, I heard the story passed to me that little boy was getting into something and he was standing up and big brother's, like Mama directed, pulled his hand back and he turned around and went, ah! Like, who are you to do? He wanted to direct his own steps because he knew how to walk. Just because we know how to walk doesn't mean we know where we should be walking. And that's the point. Lisa.
I'm reading this book right now with the book club, Mama Bear Apologetics, and it discusses...
That's a unique name.
A lot of the thoughts of today and the culture that we're in. It talks about humanism and self-help and how it's all, inside you as a person, and, all those things. And I'm like, if it's inside me, I would have already fixed myself a long time ago. That doesn't make sense. But it also talks about how any thought that elevates a person or human above God is not right. And that's kind of the whole thing our culture's telling you today. It's yourself, it's in you, have faith in yourself, and those things. And that just kind of reminds me of these verses.
It's so true. We've got the answers to all of our problems. That's why we keep coming up with new laws and new ideas. But that's what we think. You're going to say something else?
Yeah, just talking about culture today, me as a young person, just watching culture in the past 10 years, I remember in high school always being told, you can be anything, you can do anything you want. Talk about job, you can do anything. You want to become president. And that sounds well and good, but they shifted to you can be anything. You can be anything you want. And that gets people, oh, well, I want to be a woman, I'm going to be a woman. And, it just progresses further and further along, and you see that. And, well, if somebody tells me I can't be something, that translates into I have to question authority.
Right.
And so they don't fear authority. And what does the Bible tell us? The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord.
Right.
So they don't fear authority, they don't fear God, so they don't have that wisdom, they can't follow truth.
But the issues, as we're looking at here, is that for such a long time, we have been feeding ourselves and teaching our kids, and those of you in the 40s and 50s have been inheriting this through school, that we've got the answers. And it's somewhat modeled in the idea of democracy, that everybody, you get the compilation of everybody, you're going to have the best ideas and the best minds you put together, and you're going to have the best answers. But it's not always true. But that's what we've been fed. And so when I want to reach for something and somebody takes my hand out and says, you can't have that, you go, It's like, that's not fair anymore. And all of a sudden, I am being deprived of what I think is my right. And you hear that word thrown around so often, a right to choice and a right to this and a right to change sex, and all these different rights. And Chick-fil-A the other day, I heard some advertising. People are upset about them and trying to get them out of these different areas because they're standing up against LBG, whatever, light brown, blue, green, whatever that thing. No, it doesn't stand for that. I know that's my little pun in it. LBG, whatever, it's, and other things. And I'm showing my ignorance here on the terms, I understand, but I don't mind that because it doesn't have as much influence on my life as it might others who have to know that, because you've got to know it in order to be right. And I don't think we're aiming the right direction because of that. So the bell rang. That means we've got like a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. And what I want to do is just kind of look at who we are and what's going on, because if we're not careful, we can walk down the same path that so many other nations have all done. And we might be on that path, you and I might be just swept up in the midst of that, and that deluge of ungodliness. Look at Romans chapter 1. And we'll let this kind of tell the story here. Now, Rome had a set of laws and Senate and all this that is so similar to the United States. We did a lot of imitating their models of government, and in order to make sure we have a strong nation, and did a pretty good job. But in the process, they missed some major things here. Verse 18, chapter 1, for the wrath of God. That, I don't want that. That term, I don't want my name behind anything that's got that phrase at the introduction. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So they're just kind of pushing it back. That can't be the second bell.
Which is the same as Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness, to put bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter.
And it's all done by suppressing the truth. We're gonna keep it back. We don't want it to stick its head up. We're gonna do all that we can. And so, in our effort to be what we need to be in our hearts, to maintain that strength, and to let it flow out of our lives to whomever might be around us, especially our family and friends, and within the church. That idea that I talked in the lesson about having that face of deliverance, that people look at us and we carry, not a stern look, but God's taking care of me. That we ought to have that same, this is who we are. And we're proud of who we are as a people. We stand for what God says, not because we think it's right, because it's just there. All right, so read the rest of that little section sometime, but we don't have time because the bell's rung, so we'll pause right here. Let's see, Joe, would you lead us in a prayer as we wrap up our class?
Dear God, we're so thankful for you for this day and for the opportunity to come together to study your word.